Hello, everyone. Oh no, unable to connect to chat. Oh, it's too late now. Well, I'm not going to be able to see anyone's chats. I hate it when that happens because there's no way to fix that. Uh, Once you've started streaming, then you can refresh the page and it'll connect to the chat. But as far as I know, oh, your connection is unstable. That's not good news. Should have maybe restarted. Um, Wow, this is already off to a catastrophic start. I'm getting notifications that my connection is unstable and to the chat. This is great. I love it. Um Sometimes YouTube just works great and sometimes it just really does not. Okay, well, hopefully people can actually see me and hear me okay. Since I can't see the chat. Okay, I'm testing something here. Let's see.
Is it just YouTube?
Yep, the Instagram seems fine. But all right, I now am testing a way to see the chat. Let me know. Somebody say something in the chat so I can see if it's working. YouTube just decided to be a jerk today. YouTube hates literature. Okay, yes, SD. I can see your comment. All right, so I figured out a workaround so I can see the chat. That's great. Okay. I lost one of my two viewers.
Oh no.
While I was figuring that out. It's probably some rando. Anyway, all right. We are reading chapter 17 today. All right. Pepper, is that okay with you? Chapter 17? Does that sound good? You come sit next to me? No?
Like it'd be better if I had more tuna.
No. No, he got tuna earlier today, and now he doesn't understand why he's not getting it all the time. Look at that face. This face says,
I deserve tuna. Pretty happy.
Oh.
He's gonna.
Okay. Yeah. What was I saying? Chapter 17. Here we go. Mr. and Mrs. John Knightley were not detained long at Hartfield. The weather soon improved enough for those to move who must move, and Mr. Woodhouse, having, as usual, tried to persuade his daughter to stay behind with all her children, was obliged to see the whole party set off, and return to his lamentations over the destiny of poor Isabella. Which poor Isabella, passing her life with those she doted on, full of their merits, blind to their faults, and always innocently busy, might have been a model of right feminine happiness. The evening of the very day on which they went brought a note from Mr. Elton to Mr. Woodhouse, a long, civil, ceremonious note to say, with Mr. Elton's best compliments, that he was proposing to leave Highbury the following morning on his way to Bath, where, in compliance with the pressing entreaties of some friends, he had engaged to spend a few weeks, and very much regretted the impossibility he was under, from various circumstances of weather and business, of taking a personal leave of Mr. Woodhouse, of whose friendly civilities he should ever retain a grateful sense, and had Mr. Woodhouse any commands, he would be happy to attend to them. Emma was most agreeably surprised. Mr. Elton's absence just at this time was the very thing to be desired. She admired him for contriving it, though not able to give him much credit for the manner in which it was announced. Resentment could not have been more plainly spoken than in a civility to her father, from which she was so pointedly excluded. She had not even a share in his opening compliments. Her name was not mentioned, and there was so striking a change in all this, and such an ill-judged solemnity of leave-taking in his grateful acknowledgments, as she thought, at first, could not escape her father's suspicion. It did, however. Her father was quite taken up with the surprise of so sudden a journey, and his fears that Mr. Elton might never get safely to the end of it, and saw nothing extraordinary in his language. It was a very useful note, for it supplied them with fresh matter for thought and conversation during the rest of their lonely evening. Oh, boy, times used to be rough.
Yes.
Mr. Woodhouse talked over his alarms, and Emma was in spirits to persuade them away with all her usual promptitude. She now resolved to keep Harriet no longer in the dark. She had reason to believe her nearly recovered from her cold, and it was desirable that she should have as much time as possible for getting the better of her other complaint before the gentleman's return. She went to Mrs. Goddard's accordingly the very next day, to undergo the necessary penance of communication, and a severe one it was. She had to destroy all the hopes which she had been so industriously feeding, to appear in the ungracious character of the one preferred, and acknowledge herself grossly mistaken and misjudging in all her ideas on one subject, all her observations, all her convictions, all her prophecies of the last 6 weeks.
6 weeks? It's only been 6 weeks?
Right?
Wow.
All that part of me was like, I don't know, I felt like it had only been 1 month or something, so that's a little longer than I was expecting.
I suppose, yeah. It's, I don't know.
They see each other every day.
That is true. That's true.
Harriet and Emma, and then it seemed like they were seeing Mr. Elton most days. So.
That is true, yeah.
Nobody had anything else to do. Go for walks, write each other poems, and matchmake.
Cover screens and I know not what.
The confession completely renewed her first shame, and the sight of Harriet's tears made her think that she should never be in charity with herself again. Nor should she. Harriet bore the intelligence very well, blaming nobody, and in everything testifying such an ingenuousness.
Or does it look like ingenue?
No, ingenuousness.
Yep.
Ingenuousness. A lot of words in this book that I've never read before. You guys, I've read a lot of books. I'm just saying, not to brag. Such an ingenuousness of disposition and lowly opinion of herself, she must appear with particular advantage at that moment to her friend. Emma was in the humor to value simplicity and modesty to the utmost, and all that was amiable, all that ought to be attaching, seemed on Harriet's side, not her own. Harriet did not consider herself as having anything to complain of. The affection of such a man as Mr. Elton would have been too great a distinction. She never could have deserved him. And nobody so partial and kind a friend as Miss Woodhouse would have thought it possible. Her tears fell abundantly, but her grief was so truly artless that no dignity could have made it more respectable in Emma's eyes. And she listened to her and tried to console her with all her heart and understanding, really for the time convinced that Harriet was the superior creature of the two, and to resemble her would be more to her own welfare and happiness than all that genius or intelligence could do.
Wow.
It was rather too late in the day to set about being simple-minded and ignorant. I assume they're using that, she's using that as like late in the day to mean like just too late, but it really does sound like she's saying like, oh no, it's past luncheon. I can't be simple-minded and ignorant at this hour of the day.
Yes.
That's only for the morning times. Anyway, but she left her with every previous resolution confirmed of being humble and discreet, and repressing imagination all the rest of her life. Her second duty now, inferior only to her father's claims, was to promote Harriet's comfort, and endeavor to prove her affection in some better method than by matchmaking. She got her to Hartfield, and showed her the most unvarying kindness, striving to occupy and amuse her, and by books and conversation to drive Mr. Elton from her thoughts. Time, she knew, must be allowed for this being thoroughly done, and she could suppose herself but an indifferent judge of such matters in general, and very inadequate to sympathize in an attachment to Mr. Elton in particular. But it seemed to her reasonable that at Harriet's age, and with the entire routine of acquaintance, without any danger of betraying sentiments or increasing them. Harriet did think him all perfection, and maintained the non-existence of anybody equal to him in person or goodness, and did, in truth, prove herself more resolutely in love than Emma had foreseen. But yet it appeared to her so natural, so inevitable to strive against an inclination of that sort unrequited, that she could not comprehend its continuing very long in equal force. If Mr. Elton, on his return, made his own indifference as evident and indubitable as she could not doubt he would anxiously do, she could not imagine Harriet's persisting to place her happiness in the sight or the recollection of him. Their being fixed, so absolutely fixed in the same place, was bad for each, for all three. Not one of them had the power of removal, or of effecting any material change of society. They must encounter each other and make the best of it. Harriet was further unfortunate in the tone of her companions at Mrs. Goddard's, Mr. Elton being the adoration of all the teachers and great girls in the school, and it must be at Hartfield only that she could have any chance of hearing him spoken of with cooling moderation or repellent truth. Where the wound had been given, there must the cure be found, if anywhere. And Emma felt that, till she saw her in the way of cure, there could be no true peace for herself. That might be the shortest chapter in the whole book. Oh,
Indeed.
My brain just, the chapters are written in Roman numerals, and every time I'm like, I have to count it out. 10, 15, 16, 17, 18. Okay, chapter 18.
Yeah.
All right. Someone just texted me that they're listening to my podcast. I'm going to say, you could be listening to me reading. A text never takes as long as when you're live streaming.
Yeah.
I'm about to just give up this text. Just give it up for lost. Instead, just...
Can you do voice to text?
I mean, I could, but it's a bit late for that.
It's a bit late in the day.
It's a bit late in the day for that.
That's
What's that?
It's a
bit late for that. What's that from? That's from a movie. I do that all the time. I find myself saying a phrase in a particular tone, and then I'm like, well, no idea what that's from.
Oh gosh, now that's gonna bug me.
Does it sounds familiar to you too, right?
It does, yeah.
It's a bit late for that. Anyway, it's probably something I've seen a million times. Unfortunately, there are a lot of those movies, so that doesn't narrow it down much.
Yeah.
Chapter 18. Mr. Frank Churchill did not come. When the time proposed drew near, Mrs. Weston's fears were justified in the arrival of a letter of excuse. For the present, he could not be spared, to his very great mortification and regret, but still he looked forward with the hope of coming to Randalls at no distant period. Jerk. Mrs. Weston was exceedingly disappointed, much more disappointed, in fact, than her husband, though her dependence on seeing the young man had been so much more sober. But a sanguine temper, though forever expecting more good than occurs, does not always pay for its hopes by any proportionate depression. It soon flies over the present failure and begins to hope again. For half an hour, Mr. Weston was surprised and sorry. But then he began to perceive that Frank's coming 2 or 3 months later would be a much better plan, better time of year, better weather, and that he would be able, without any doubt, to stay considerably longer with them than if he had come sooner. This is why Mr. Weston is like, he's kind of annoying, but like he's so pure.
Yeah.
He's kind of a cinnamon roll. He's like, oh, my son is a jerk. But you know what? Actually, it's going to be better this way. I mean, it'll be better weather. He'll be able to stay with us longer next time. Everything's fine. I'm not disappointed at all.
I know, right? This after he was rejoicing in the thought of his guest being snowbound in his house.
Well,
in the last chapter.
I think it's more like he went like, oh, we might all get snowed in. Well, that's okay. That would actually be good. Actually, that would be great.
That's true.
It's the same thing. It's something bad is about to happen, and he goes, but what if it's something great?
Yeah. But what if it's not a catastrophe at all?
What if it's actually awesome news? Hear me out. Okay. These feelings rapidly restored his comfort, and Mrs. Weston, of a more apprehensive disposition, foresaw nothing but a repetition of excuses and delays, and after all her concern for what her husband was to suffered a great deal more herself. Emma was not at this time in a state of spirits to care really about Mr. Frank Churchill's not coming, except as a disappointment at Randalls. The acquaintance at present had no charm for her. Excuse me. She wanted rather to be quiet and out of temptation, but still as if But still, as it was desirable that she should appear, in general, like her usual self, she took care to express as much interest in the circumstance, and enter as warmly into Mr. and Mrs. Weston's disappointment as might naturally belong to their friendship. She was the first to announce it to Mr. Knightley, and exclaimed quite as much as was necessary, or, being acting a part, perhaps rather more, at the conduct of the Churchills in keeping him away. She then proceeded to say a good deal more than she felt of the advantage of such an addition to their confined society in Surrey. The pleasure of looking at somebody new. Like,
I mean,
that's so real though, right? Oh, a big person to look at. Ooh, really. When my society is, my whole town is roughly the same, like a couple dozen people or something.
Right, yeah, exactly.
I don't know how many people would have lived in a village like that, but anyway.
Certainly doesn't sound like a lot.
No, it doesn't. Well, it's probably at least 24 families.
I was just thinking of that too. I was like, it sounds somewhat confined and
Yeah.
uncaring.
Seems like Emma feels that way too.
Yes.
The gala day to Highbury entire, which the sight of him would have made, and ending with reflections on the Churchills again, found herself directly involved in a disagreement with Mr. Knightley, and to her great amusement, perceived that she was taking the other side of the question from her real opinion, and making use of Mrs. Weston's arguments against herself. To her great amusement, she perceived she was taking the opposite opinion in an argument that she actually felt. How amusing! The Churchills are very likely in fault, said Mr. Knightley coolly, but I dare say he might come if he would. I do not know why you should say so. He wishes exceedingly to come, but his uncle and aunt will not spare him. I cannot believe that he has not the power of coming if he made a point of it. It is too unlikely for me to believe it without proof. How odd you are. What has Mr. Frank Churchill done to make you suppose him such an unnatural creature? I am not supposing him at all an unnatural creature, in suspecting that he may have learned to be above his connections, and to care very little for anything but his own pleasure, from living with those who have always set him the example of it. It is a great deal more natural than one could wish, that a young man, brought up by those who are proud, luxurious, and selfish, should be proud, luxurious, and selfish too. If Frank Churchill had wanted to see his father, he would have contrived it between September and January. A man at his age, what is he, 3 or 24, cannot be without the means of doing as much as that. It is impossible. That is easily said and easily felt by you, who have always been your own master. You are the worst judge in the world, Mr. Knightley, of the difficulties of dependence. You do not know what it is to have tempers to manage. It is not to be conceived that a man of 3 or 24 should not have liberty of mind or limb to that amount. He cannot want money, he cannot want leisure. We know, on the contrary, that he has so much of both that he is glad to get rid of them at the idlest haunts in the kingdom. We hear of him forever at some watering place or another. A little while ago he was at Weymouth. This proves that he can leave the Churchills. Yes, sometimes he can. And those times are whenever he thinks it worth his while, whenever there is any temptation of pleasure. It is very unfair to judge of anybody's conduct without intimate knowledge of their situation. Nobody who has not been in the interior of a family can say what the difficulties of any individual of that family may be. We ought to be acquainted with Enscombe and with Mrs. Churchill's temper before we pretend to decide what her nephew can do. I'm sorry. Apparently that was all Mr. Knightley. It's just written as if it was written as if it was the narrator, and I'm like, this is weird for the narrator to be talking this way.
Yeah, and that's sort of contrary to what he's been saying too.
So yeah, I'm so confused.
It sounds like Emma.
It's Emma?
Yeah.
Good Lord.
I mean, it's.
Did I get lost in who was talking? No,
it's her side
Mr.
of the
Knightley.
argument.
That's Emma, and that cannot be conceived that a man of 24 should not have liberty of mind. That's Mr. Knightley, and then Emma says yes, sometimes he can, and then Mr. Knightley would say, and those times are whatever he thinks it worth his while, and whatever there's a missing quotation mark. That must be what it is. It's just a typo. All right, sorry everybody. It is very unfair to judge of anybody's conduct without an intimate knowledge of their situation. Nobody who has not been in the interior of a family can say what the difficulties of any individual of that family may be. We ought to be acquainted with Enscombe and with Mrs. Churchill's temper before we pretend to decide what her nephew can do. he may at times be able to do a great deal more than he can at others. There is one thing, Emma, which a man can always do if he chooses, and that is his duty. Oh, snap! Not by maneuvering and finessing, but by vigor and resolution. It is Frank Churchill's duty to pay this attention to his father. He knows it to be so by his promises and messages, but if he wished to do it, it might be done. A man who felt rightly would say at once, simply and resolutely, to Mrs. Churchill, "Every sacrifice of mere pleasure you will always find me ready to make to your convenience, but I must go and see my father immediately. I know he would be hurt by my failing in such a mark of respect to him on the present occasion. I shall, therefore, set off tomorrow." If he would say so to her at once, in the tone of decision becoming a man, there would be no opposition made to his going. Well, that seems a little bit ignorant to me.
A little bit, yeah.
Oh my gosh, Mr. Knightley's wrong about something for once. How refreshing. No, said Emma, laughing, but perhaps there might be some made to his coming back again. Such language for a young man entirely dependent to use. Nobody but you, Mr. Knightley, would imagine it possible. You have not an idea of what is requisite in situations directly opposite to your own. Mr. Frank Churchill to be making such a speech as that to an uncle and aunt who have brought him up and are to provide for him, standing up in the middle of the room, I suppose, and speaking as loud as he could. How can you imagine such conduct practicable? Depend upon it, Emma, a sensible man would find no difficulty in it. He would feel himself in the right, and the declaration, made, of course, as a man of sense would make in a proper manner, would do him more good, raise him up higher, fix his interest stronger with the people he depended on, than all that a line of shifts and expedients can ever do. Respect would be added to the affection. They would feel that they could trust him, that the nephew who had done rightly by his father would do rightly by them, for they know as well as he does, as well as all the world must know, that he ought to pay this visit to his father, and while meanly exerting their power to delay it, are in their hearts not thinking the better of him for submitting to their whims. Respect for right conduct is felt by everybody. If he would act in this sort of manner, on principle, consistently, regularly, their little minds would bend to his.
He's assuming a lot.
He is, yeah.
It's kind of like when he said
He's
that
being a little innocent.
No man would want a stupid wife or something.
Well,
or
yeah.
Like any man of sense, which means a man like me.
Yeah. He definitely, in a certain way, he's like Mr. Woodhouse in that he thinks that everybody thinks like himself.
Yeah.
Or that everyone should.
Yes.
In a very different way.
Yes.
It displays itself in a different way, but...
Yeah, but he does, He at least assumes that other men are like him.
Well, yes. I rather doubt that. You are very fond of bending little minds, but where little minds belong to rich people in authority, I think they have a knack of swelling out, till they are quite as unmanageable as great ones. I can imagine that if you, as you are, Mr. Knightley, were to be transported and placed all at once in Mr. Frank Churchill's situation, you would be able to say and do just what you have recommended for him, and it might have a very good effect. The Churchills might not have a word to say in return, but then you would have no habits of early obedience and long observance to break through. That is a very good point.
Mm-hmm.
To him who has, it might not be so easy to burst forth at once into perfect independence, and set all their claims on his gratitude and regard it not. He may have as strong a sense of what would be right as you can have, without being so equal, under particular circumstances, to act up on it. I like this conversation.
Yeah.
They're both acting not like idiots, which is
yes.
Nice.
Emma's making some
even
good
though they
arguments,
have,
which is not,
they're
always the case.
Yeah, they're both making good points, and Emma is slightly more in the right in this situation, which is nice.
Yeah.
Then it would not be so strong a sense. If it failed to produce equal exertion, it could not be an equal conviction. Oh, the difference of situation and habit! I wish you would try to understand what an amiable young man may be likely to feel in directly opposing those whom, as a child and boy, he has been looking up to all his life. Your amiable young man is a very weak young man, if this is the first occasion of his carrying through a resolution to do right against the will of others. It ought to have been a habit with him, by this time, of following his duty, instead of consulting expediency. I can allow for the fears of the child, but not the man. As he became rational, he ought to have roused himself and shaken off all that was unworthy in their authority. Yes, let's all just fix ourselves.
Yes.
Oh,
with
Mr. Knightley.
no
Right? Yeah, it doesn't.
impetus, nothing in.
Yeah, it doesn't matter how we may have been manipulated or groomed when we were young. As soon as you become an adult, you just rouse yourself of all that and become a totally different person. You
Yes.
just become Mr. Knightley. Why is that so hard?
Yeah.
What do you think, Pepper? Can you just become Mr. Knightley? Waiting.
He's like, I'm already perfect. I don't
That's
know
a
what
very good
you're
point.
suggesting.
Oh, Pepper is already perfect.
I don't know why you're suggesting that I should change myself.
You're no Johnny Flynn, but you'll do. You'll do.
Or Johnny Lee Miller. Apparently, Mr. Knightley needs to be played, at least lately, by people named Johnny.
See, that was what was wrong with the Gwyneth Paltrow version.
Yes.
He wasn't played by a Johnny.
That's right.
Clearly.
Yeah.
Science. Anyway, where were we? I can allow for the fears of the child, but not the man. As he became rational, he ought to have roused himself and shaken off all that was unworthy in their authority. He ought to have opposed the first attempt on their side to make him slight his father. Well, that's true. Had he begun as he ought, there would have been no difficulty now. We shall never agree about him, cried Emma, but that is nothing extraordinary. I have not the least idea of his being a weak young man. I feel sure that he is not. Mr. Weston would not be blind to folly, though in his own son. Well, I don't know what that. Yeah. But he is very likely to have a more yielding, complying, mild disposition that would suit your notions of man's perfection. I dare say he has, and though it may cut him off from some advantages, it will secure him many others. Yes, all the advantages of sitting still when he ought to move, and of leading a life of mere idle pleasure, and fancying himself extremely expert in finding excuses for it. He can sit down and write a fine, flourishing letter, full of professions and falsehoods, and persuade himself that he has hit upon the very best method in the world of preserving peace at home, and preventing his father's having any right to complain. His letters disgust me. Your feelings are singular. Yeah, that's pretty strong.
I mean, I don't blame him, but that's pretty strong.
Oh, you're right, Esty. You're right. Jeremy Northam is delightful.
Yeah.
I kind of forgot for a moment that it was Jeremy Northam. I just knew it wasn't someone named Johnny. He is delightful. He's one of the better things about that adaptation.
Yes.
IMO. Your feelings are singular. They seem to satisfy everybody else. Oh, they seem to satisfy everybody else. They, the letters, not they, your feelings. I suspect they do not satisfy. It is on her account that attention to Randall's is doubly due, and she must doubly feel the omission. Had she been a person of consequence herself, he would have come, I dare say, and I would not have signified whether he did or no. Can you think your friend behindhand in these sort of considerations? Do you suppose she does not often say all this to herself? No, Emma. Your amiable young man can be amiable only in French, not in English. Does amiable mean something different in French? Is that like a play on words there? Not really sure. Or is that a figure of speech for someone to be?
It sounds like a figure of speech.
Yeah.
I don't know it. I haven't heard of it before.
He may be very amiable, have very good manners, and be very agreeable, but he can have no English decency towards the feelings of others. Nothing really amiable about him. You seem determined to think ill of him. Me? Not at all, replied Mr. Knightley, rather displeased. I do not want to think ill of him. I should be as ready to acknowledge his merits as any other man, but I hear of none, except what are merely personal, that he is well-grown and good-looking, with smooth, plausible manners. Well, if he have nothing else to recommend him, he will be a treasure at Highbury. We do not often look upon fine young men, well-bred and agreeable. We must not be nice and ask for all the virtues into the bargain. Cannot you imagine, Mr. Knightley, what a sensation his coming will produce? There will be but one subject throughout the parishes of Donwell and Highbury, but one interest, one object of curiosity. It will be all Mr. Frank Churchill. We shall think and speak of nobody else. You will excuse my being so much overpowered. If I find him conversable, I shall be glad of his acquaintanceship. Of his acquaintance. Oh, I had ship on there. But if he is only a chattering coxcomb, he will not occupy much of my time or thoughts. Oh, chattering coxcomb. That is a good insult.
It is.
Right there.
That's
Everybody make a note of that one.
That's almost Shakespearean.
For next time. Yeah, chattering coxcomb. My idea of him is that he can adapt his conversation to the taste of everybody, and has the power as well as the wish of being universally agreeable. To you, he will talk of farming, to me, of drawing or music, and so on to everybody, having that general information on all subjects which will enable him to follow the lead, or take the lead, just as propriety might require, and to speak extremely well on each. That is my idea of him.
That's
Sounds like she just made that up out of nowhere. But
yeah, I was like, okay.
Where did you get this idea, Emma? And mine, said Mr. Knightley warmly, is that if he turns out anything like it, he will be the most insufferable fellow breathing. What? At 23 to be the king of his company, the great man, the practiced politician, who is to read everybody's character and make everybody's talents conduce to the display of his own superiority, to be dispensing his flatteries around that he may make all appear like fools compared with himself? My dear Emma, your own good sense could not endure such a puppy when it came to the point. I have heard that before, puppy, as an insult for sort of silly young man. I love that.
That is, yeah.
I will say no more about him, cried Emma, if you turn everything to evil. We are both prejudiced, you against, I for him, and we have no chance of agreeing till he is really here. Prejudiced? I'm not prejudiced.
I'm just proud.
But I am very much, and without being at all ashamed of it. My love for Mr. and Mrs. Weston gives me a decided prejudice in his favor. He is a person I never think of from one month's end to another, said Mr. Knightley, with a degree of vexation which made Emma immediately talk of something else, though she could not comprehend why he should be angry. To take a dislike to a young man, only because he appeared to be of a different disposition from himself, was unworthy the real liberality of mind which she was always used to acknowledge in him. For with all the high opinion of himself, which she had often laid to his charge, she had never before for a moment supposed it could make him unjust to the merit of another. And that is the end of chapter 18. It's like, it's only been half an hour. I'm just taking a look to see if chapter 19 is maybe really short. Well, it's not super long. I'm going to go for it.
Go for it.
We'll see if I regret it like last time. Chapter 19. Emma and Harriet had been walking together one morning, and she was therefore industriously getting rid of the subject as they returned. But it burst out again when she thought she had succeeded, and after speaking some time of what the poor must suffer in winter, and receiving no other answer than a very plaintive, "Mr. Elton is so good to the poor," she found something else must be done. They were just approaching the house where lived Mrs. and Miss Bates. Oh, finally, we have not met Miss Bates yet.
Oh, really? Oh.
She has been mentioned a few times. We haven't actually met her yet.
Okay.
They were just approaching the house where lived Mrs. and Miss Bates. She determined to call upon them and seek safety in numbers. There was always sufficient reason for such an attention. Mrs. and Miss Bates loved to be called on, and she knew she was considered by the very few who presumed ever to see imperfection in her as rather negligent in that respect, and as not contributing what she ought to the stock of their scanty comforts. She had oh gosh, sorry.
Me.
Someone just dumped a bunch of loud stuff in the recycling.
Yeah.
Which is right next to an open window. So.
Yes.
Or right below an open window, anyway. Okay, are you done yet? I don't know if anyone can hear this on the YouTube. It feels very loud in the room, I'll tell you that. She had many a hint from Mr. Knightley, and some from her own heart, as to her deficiency, but none were equal to counteract the persuasion of its being very disagreeable. A waste of time, tiresome woman, and all the horror of being in danger of falling in with the second-rate and third-rate of Highbury, who were calling them forever, and therefore she seldom went near them. But now she made the sudden resolution of not passing their door without going in, observing, as she proposed it to Harriet, that as well as she could calculate, they were just now quite safe from any letter from Jane Fairfax. The house belonged to people in business. Mrs. and Miss Bates occupied the drawing-room floor, and there, in the very moderate-sized apartment, which was everything to them, the visitors were most cordially and even gratefully welcomed. The quiet, neat old lady, who with her knitting was seated in the warmest corner, wanting even to give up her place to Miss Woodhouse, and her more active, talking daughter, almost ready to overpower them with care and kindness. Thanks for their visit, solicitude for their shoes, anxious inquiries after Mr. Woodhouse's health, cheerful communications about her mother's, and sweet cake from the buffet. Mrs. Cole. Mrs. Cole had just been there, just called in for 10 minutes, and had been so good as to sit an hour with them, and she had taken a piece of cake and been so kind as to say she liked it very much, and therefore she hoped Miss Woodhouse and Miss Smith would do them the favor to eat a piece too. I just realized, oh no, I have to figure out a voice for Miss Bates. I haven't done one yet. I take these voices very seriously, you guys.
Yes.
The mention of the Coles was sure to be followed by that of Mr. Elton. There was intimacy between them, and Mr. Cole had heard from Mr. Elton since his going away. Emma knew what was coming. They must have the letter over again and settle how long he had been gone, how much he was engaged in company, what a favorite he was wherever he went, and how full the Master of Ceremonies ball had been. And she went through it very well, with all the interest and all the commendation that could be requisite, always putting forward to prevent Harriet's being obliged to say a word. This she had been prepared for when she entered the house, but meant, having once talked him handsomely over, to be no further incommoded by any troublesome topic, and to wander at large amongst all the mistresses and misses of Highbury and their card parties. She had not been prepared to have Jane Fairfax succeed Mr. Elton, but he was actually hurried off by Miss Bates. She jumped away from him She jumped away from him at last, abruptly to the Coles, to usher in a letter from her niece. Oh, yes, Mr. Elton, I understand. Certainly, as to dancing. Mrs. Cole was telling me that dancing at the rooms at Bath was... Mrs. Cole was so kind as to sit some time with us, talking of Jane, for as soon as she came in, she began inquiring after her. Jane is so very great a favourite there. Whenever she is with us, Mrs. Cole does not know how to show her kindness enough. And I must say that Jane deserves it as much as anybody can. And so she began inquiring after her directly, saying, I know you cannot have heard from Jane lately, because it is not her time for writing. And when I immediately said, but indeed we have, we had a letter this very morning, I do not know that I ever saw anybody more surprised. Have you, upon your honour? Said she. Well, that is quite unexpected. Do let me hear what it says. Emma's politeness was at hand directly to say, with smiling interest, have you heard from Miss Fairfax so lately? I am extremely happy. I hope she is well. Thank you. You are so kind, replied the happily deceived aunt, while eagerly hunting for the letter. Oh, here it is. I was sure it could not be far off, but I had put my housewife upon it, you see, without being aware, and so it was quite hid. But I had it in my hand so very lately that I was almost sure it must be on the table. I was reading it to Mrs. Cole, and since she went away, I was reading it again to my mother, for it is such a pleasure to her, a letter from Jane, that she can never hear it often enough. So I knew it could not be far off.
It's a little sewing kit.
Oh, a little. Is it pronounced housewife or?
I think it's
housewife.
I think it's housewife.
Housewife. All right, I've never heard of it before.
I didn't know that women had them. I've heard of them as something that sailors and soldiers took with them.
Oh, that makes the euphemism make more sense.
Yeah.
Like I brought a little housewife with me.
Yeah. Like it's like, you know, how you do your mending and
right.
You know,
yeah.
sewing.
When there isn't a real woman around.
Yes.
To do her woman's work.
I didn't know that women sometimes had them too.
Yeah.
Apparently they do. Did.
Yes, did indeed.
Yes.
I was just checking as long as we were paused to make sure the GarageBand recording was still going, and it was.
Oh, lovely.
Excellent. And since you are so kind as to wish to hear what she says, but first of all, I really must, in justice to Jane, apologize for her writing so short a letter. Only 2 pages, you see, hardly 2, and in general she fills the whole paper and crosses half. My mother often wonders that I can make it out so well. She often says, when the letter is first opened, well, Hetty, now I think you will be put to it to make out all that checker work. Don't you, Mom? Here's the illustration of the 2 young ladies being shown the letter by Miss Bates.
Nice.
And Mrs. Bates sort of leering in the corner. Well, at least this is actually the scene that's happening this time in the illustration.
That's
It's not
true.
like somebody describing something or an offhand comment.
That is true.
Ahem. And then I tell her if I am sure she would contrive to make it out herself if she had nobody to do it for her, every word of it. I am sure she would pore over it till she had made out every word. And indeed, though my mother's eyes are not as good as they were, she can see amazingly well still, thank God, with the help of spectacles. It is such a blessing. My mother's are really very good indeed. Jane often says when she is here, I am sure, Grandmamma, you must have had very strong eyes to see as you do, and so much fine work as you have done, too. I only wish my eyes may last me as well. All this spoken extremely fast obliged Miss Bates to stop for breath, and Emma had said something. I wish you would describe how the person is talking first, so I know how to read it. Come on, Jane.
Yeah.
It's like you didn't know I was going to be reading this and doing funny voices. Obliged Miss Bates to stop for breath, and Emma said something very civil about the excellence of Miss Fairfax's handwriting. You are extremely kind, replied Miss Bates, highly gratified. You who are such a judge and write so beautifully yourself. I am sure there is nobody's praise that could give us so much pleasure as Miss Woodhouse's. My mother does not hear. She is and Emma had the advantage of hearing her own silly compliment repeated twice over before the good old lady could comprehend it. She was pondering in the meanwhile upon the possibility, without seeming very rude, of making her escape from Jane Fairfax's letter, and had almost resolved on hurrying away directly under some slight excuse, when Miss Bates turned to her again and seized her attention. My mother's deafness is very trifling, you see, just nothing at all. By only raising my voice and saying anything 2 or 3 times over, she is sure to hear. But then she is used to my voice. But it is very remarkable that she should always hear Jane better than she does me. Jane speaks so distinct. However, she will not find her grandmamma at all deafer than she was 2 years ago, which is saying a great deal, Mrs. Cole. We shall hardly know how to make enough of her now. Are you expecting Miss Fairfax here soon? Oh, yes, next week. Indeed, that must be a very great pleasure. Thank you. You are very kind. Yes, next week. Everybody is so surprised. Everybody says the same obliging things. I am sure she will be as happy to see her friends at Highbury as they can be to see her. Yes, Friday or Saturday, she cannot say which, because Colonel Campbell will be wanting the carriage himself one of those days. So very good of them to send her the whole way, but they always do, you know. Oh, yes, Friday or Saturday next. That is what she writes about. That is the reason for her writing out a rule, as we call it, for in the common course we should not have heard from her before next Tuesday or Wednesday. Yes, so I imagined. I was afraid there could be little chance of my hearing anything of Miss Fairfax today. No, so obliging of you. No, we should not have heard if it had not been for this particular circumstance of her being come here so soon. My mother is so delighted, for she is to be 3 months with us at least. 3 months, she says so positively, as I am going to have the pleasure of reading to you. The case is, you see, that the Campbells are going to Ireland. Mrs. Dixon has persuaded her father and mother to come over and see her directly. They had not intended to go over till the summer, but she is so impatient to see them again, for till she married last October, she was never away from them so much as a week, which must make it very strange to be in different kingdoms. I was going to say, but however different countries. And so she wrote a very urgent letter to her mother and father. I declare I do not know which it was, but we shall see presently in Jane's letter. Wrote in Mr. Dixon's name as well as her own to press their coming over directly, and they would give them the meeting in Dublin and take them back to their country seat, Ballycraig, a beautiful place, I fancy. Jane has heard a great deal of its beauty, from Mr. Dixon, I mean. I do not know that she ever heard about it from anybody else. But it was very natural, you know, that he should like to speak of his own place when he was paying his addresses, and as Jane used to be very often walking out with them, for Colonel and Mrs. Campbell were very particular about their daughters not walking out often with only Mr. Dixon, for which I do not blame them, at all blame them. Of course, she heard everything he might be telling Miss Campbell about his own home in Ireland, and I think she wrote us word that he had shown them some drawings of the place, views that he had taken himself. He's
Right.
exhausting to be her. I love that she is telling them every piece of information in the letter, followed by, as I will read you in the letter. It's like,
right.
oh no, please don't tell us everything, and then also read the letter.
Yeah.
Good God.
Yeah.
Okay. I might need that. The blinds closed shortly. The sun is.
Oh, okay.
It's doing that thing.
The thing where it moves around the sky.
It moves around the sky.
Yeah.
And then when I'm seated in just the right place for it to like come right on the side of that balcony. Anyway.
Yes.
Okay, now I can see again. Oh, good heavens. At this moment, an ingenious and animating suspicion entered Emma's brain with regard to Jane Fairfax, this charming Mr. Dixon, and the not going to Ireland. She said, with the insidious design of further discovery, "You must feel it very fortunate that Miss Fairfax should be allowed to come to you at such a time. Considering the very particular friendship between her and Mrs. Dixon, you could hardly have expected her to be excused from accompanying Colonel and Mrs. Campbell." "Very, very true indeed. The very thing that we have always been rather afraid of, for we should not have liked to have her at such a distance from us, for months together, excessively to come over with Colonel and Mrs. Campbell. Quite depend upon it, nothing can be more kind or pressing than their joint invitation," Jane says, as you will hear presently. "Mr. Dixon does not seem in the least backward in any attention. He is a most charming young man. Ever since the service he rendered Jane at Weymouth, when they were out in that party on the water, and she, by the sudden whirling round of something or other among the sails, would have been dashed into the sea at once, and actually was all but gone, if he had not, with the greatest presence of mind, caught hold of her habit. I could never think of it without trembling. But ever since we had the history of that day, I have been so fond of Mr. Dixon." But in spite of all her friend's urgency and her own wish of seeing Ireland, Miss Fairfax prefers devoting the time to you and Mrs. Bates? "Yes, entirely her own doing, entirely her own choice. Colonel and Mrs. Campbell think she does quite right." I'm trying to... The lighting has become weird. There we go. Bring a little more light on my face. So people can see how pretty I am when I'm reading. And Colonel and Mrs. Campbell think she does quite right. Just what they should recommend. And indeed, they particularly wish her to try her native air, as she has not been quite so well as you. Okay. "I am concerned to hear of it. I think they judge wisely, but Mrs. Dixon must be very much disappointed. Mrs. Dixon, I understand, has no remarkable degree of personal beauty, is not by any means to be compared with Miss Fairfax."
Wow.
What a thing to say about a stranger.
Seriously.
"Oh, no, you are very obliging to say such things, but certainly not. There's no comparison between them. Miss Campbell always was absolutely plain, but extremely elegant and amiable." "Yes, that of course. Jane caught a bad cold, poor thing, so long ago as the 7th of November, as I am going to read to you, and has never been well since. A long time, is it not, for a cold to hang upon her? She never mentioned it before, because she would not alarm us. Just like her, so considerate. But, however, she is so far from well that her kind friends, the Campbells, think had better come home and try an air that always agrees with her, and they have no doubt that 3 or 4 months at Highbury will entirely cure her, and it is certainly a great deal better than she should come here than go to Ireland if she is unwell. No one could nurse her there as we should do. It appears to me the most desirable arrangement in the world." And so she is to come to us next Friday or Saturday, and the Campbells leave town in their way to Holyhead the Monday following, as you will find from Jane's letter. So sudden, you may guess, dear Miss Woodhouse, what a flurry it has thrown me in. If it was not to that, I always make a point of reading Jane's letters through to myself first, before I read them aloud to my mother, you know, for fear of there being anything in them to distress her. Jane desired me to do it, so I always do, and so I began today with my usual caution. But no sooner did I come to the mention of her being unwell. However, when I read on, I found it was not nearly so bad as I fancied at first. Can you pull the blinds all the way closed?
Sure.
It is peeping through the little bits. There we go. All right. Where was I? Oh, I found it was not near so bad as I fancied at first, and I make so light of it now, not to her, that she does not think much about it. But I cannot imagine that I would be so off my card. If Jane does not get well enough soon, we shall call in Mr. Perry. The expense shall not be thought of, and though he is so liberal and so fond of Jane, I dare say he would not mean to charge anything for attendance. We would not suffer it to be so, you know. He has a wife and family to maintain, and is not to be giving away his time. Well, now have just given you a hint of what Jane writes about. We shall turn to her letter. I'm sure she tells her own story a great deal better than I can tell it for her. I am afraid we must be running away, said Emma, glancing at Harriet and beginning to rise. My father will be expecting us. I had no intention. I thought I had no power of staying more than 5 minutes when I first entered the house. I merely called because I would not pass the door without inquiring after Mrs. Bates. But I have been so pleasantly detained. Now, however, we must wish you and Mrs. Bates good morning. And not at all that could be urged to detain her succeeded. She regained the street, happy in this, that though much had been forced on her against her will, though she had, in fact, heard the whole substance of Jane Fairfax's letter, she had been able to escape the letter itself. And that is the end of today. We shall 10 minutes. Weirdly short chapter, but chapters are pretty random, it seems.
Yes.
All right, that is all of our reading for today. In case you didn't notice, I have made up the stream pages for the rest of the week for Thursday and Friday on my account. If you go to the videos, and then it's super dumb. It used to be you just went to videos, and if you go there and click on live, then you will see all of the videos I've posted live, including the ones that are yet to come. So I'm going to try and be better about that and have at least a week ahead of myself at any given time. Right now I have until Sunday. So any of those you can click on set reminder, and I believe in some manner YouTube will remind you when I actually go live. So if you're having a hard time remembering what day or time it is, which is pretty frequent these days for all of us, you can click on that and it'll give you a little reminder. But at present, I am doing Monday through Friday, 6 p.m. Pacific start time for these readings. I'm currently doing the concerts Sunday. This Sunday will be at 6 p.m. as well. I think I might try next week after switching to Saturday and then going back and forth every week, Saturday, Sunday. Some people have said that Sunday doesn't work for them, and some people have said Saturday doesn't work for them. So I'm going to try switching back and forth. I hope it's not too confusing. That will be aided by me making the video pages more than a week in advance. So if you want to watch one, you can click on set reminder and you'll be reminded. So on that note, I shall say goodbye to you, and I'll see you tomorrow. Thanks for listening. Bye. Bye.